I met her in a dark, cozy café where the shadows seemed to whisper secrets to each other. Amalia, a girl with jet black hair cascading to her waist, always dressed with impeccable Gothic style. That afternoon, she wore a fitted velvet corset in deep purple, paired with a long black lace skirt that brushed the floor with every step. Her tall boots, adorned with silver buckles, echoed on the cafe's wooden floor, and her neck was framed by a choker featuring a cameo that seemed to belong to another era. But what stood out the most were her eyes, large, deep, outlined with meticulous precision, shimmering with a mix of melancholy and mystery. Beside her sat her inseparable sister, Isabela, identical in every way, though with a darker aura. Where Amalia seemed introspective, Isabela was sharper, wielding a biting sense of humor as a shield. Both were Gothic to their core, but there was something else about them, something that set them apart from everyone else in our circle. I didn't understand it at first, but soon I would discover their lives were intertwined with a tragedy far beyond imagination. It was during one of our conversations that they first told me about their mother. According to them, she was an obsessively protective woman, someone who never let them leave without ensuring they were safe. It's understandable, I suppose, Amalia said, stirring her tea slowly. But sometimes I feel she carries a pain that isn't ours. What do you mean? I asked, intrigued. Isabela chimed in, leaning her elbows on the table and fixing her gaze on me. We weren't always just us, you know? There were two others before. The confession left me stunned. They both looked at me with an unsettling calm, as if they were sharing a secret long locked away. Our mother had another set of twins, Amalia continued, her voice barely a whisper. They died years ago, run over by a truck. A chill ran down my spine. I wanted to ask more, but something in their expressions told me not to push further. A few days later, Amalia invited me to accompany them to the cemetery. It was a place they visited often, and though I initially found it strange, I agreed. We arrived at sunset when the sky was painted in reddish hues and shadows began to stretch. Amalia and Isabela seemed entirely at ease in that setting. Amalia wore a black Victorian-style dress with long sleeves and a corset that accentuated her slender figure. Isabela, on the other hand, opted for something simpler, a black blouse with lace details and a leather skirt that reached her knees. Both wore wide-brimmed hats, giving them an ethereal, almost unreal air. We stopped in front of a weathered tombstone. I didn't need to ask to know it belonged to the first twins. Amalia knelt, placing a bouquet of black roses on the grave. Sometimes I feel like they're watching us, she said, breaking the silence. Isabela nodded. They're not just watching, they're here. I didn't know what to say. There was something in the way they spoke, a certainty I couldn't ignore. It all began a few weeks later. We were walking together through a park when Amalia stopped abruptly, gripping my arm tightly. Did you hear that? She asked, her face pale. Hear what? I replied, confused. The screeching brakes, she whispered. I hadn't heard anything, but Amalia was convinced she had. Isabela, walking a few steps ahead, turned with a worried expression. Again, she said, as if it were something familiar. I didn't understand what was happening, but I decided not to press the matter. However, that night, as I said goodbye to them, I saw something that froze me in place. Two figures, identical to Amalia and Isabela, reflected in a nearby window. The strange thing was that, though they were facing away from me, the figures in the glass were staring directly at me. It was during a nighttime visit to the cemetery that I finally began to understand what was happening. Amalia and Isabela were determined to confront whatever was tormenting them. We can't keep ignoring it, Amalia said as we walked among the graves. Our mother always wanted to protect us, but she can't protect us from them, Isabela added. They led me to the same gravestone we had visited before, but this time something was different. There were fresh marks in the dirt, as if someone had been digging recently. "They're angry," Amalia whispered. "They think we replaced them." Suddenly, the air grew icy. The shadows around us seemed to shift, and a faint sound, like screeching brakes, echoed in the distance. "What do we do?" I asked, fear creeping into my voice. "We don't know," Isabela replied, her voice trembling. That night, something changed in them. Though we continued to see each other, there was a growing distance, an invisible barrier I couldn't cross. Eventually, they stopped responding to my messages, and when I went to find them, I discovered their house was empty. I never found out what happened to them. Sometimes I think about them. Their impeccable Gothic style, their dark secrets, and the tragedy that seemed to follow them. And every time I pass that cemetery, I can't shake the feeling that something is watching me from the shadows. Something that bears the faces of Amalia and Isabela, but isn't them.